Welcome to Hillbilly Talk with Simmons, where each week we discuss the history and events that help shape the life from the hollers of Appalachia to the hills of the Ozarks. Now, here's your host, Simmons.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is Hillbilly Talk, and I am Simmons, just as the man said. This is our very first episode of this podcast, so we're going to kick it off with a few little stories that we're hoping will entertain and thrill you to death. First one is a battle that has been people waged for years, finally going to be settled once and for all. We are going to have named right here today, right now, just in a matter of minutes, we're going to decide who is the queen of the hillbilly women. And it can only be two contestants for that at this point, and that is Loretta Lynn versus Dolly Parton. So we're going to get that one settled. After that, we'll talk a few of the superstitions that are prevalent throughout the hillbilly world, and then we'll do some phrases that have been popular with mountain folk for years and years and years. And time permitting, we will even talk about one of our towns and how they got their name. So it looks like we got a jam-packed show. We'll get off with this heavyweight showdown because I know you can't stand to wait for it later. Let's just go ahead and get it on. So away we go, and we're going to start off here with Dolly Parton versus Loretta Lynn. I love them both. I think most people do. It's just, there can only be one winner. Just like I said earlier, there can't be two. We've kicked this around for decades now, and it's time to settle this thing once and for all. So I'll make the case for both of these ladies, just in case there's somebody out there not familiar with them or their work. First up is Loretta Lynn. She was born in Butcher Holler, Van Lear, Kentucky, in Johnson County. Raised up poor as the daughter of a coal miner, as we all know from her famous song, Coal Miner's Daughter. And they lived in a little tiny house. I've actually been there and visited, and it's quite an experience. It's right up a holler, just like the word would lead you to believe. She married at 15 to her husband, Doolittle Lynn, and she even worked with Conway Twitty. That's something to brag about, for sure. She was the mother of 6 during her troubled marriage. So that's pretty much the background on Loretta Lynn. She had songs that are even still popular today, such as Coal Miner's Daughter that I mentioned a minute ago. You Ain't Woman Enough to Take My Man, which is another good one. Fist City, and Don't Come Home a-Drinkin' with Lovin' on Your Mind. One of the better titles that you'll hear. The song You Ain't Woman Enough to Make My Man, or to Take My Man, or make my man either, I guess, but To Take My Man was actually a true story. A woman confided in Loretta Lynn backstage one day that a lady was trying to take her husband away, and Loretta said, "Honey, she ain't woman enough to take your man." And right after that, she got inspired to go into her dressing room and write that song. So that was based on a true story. So that's a skinny on Loretta Lynn. So that's her credentials for being here. Been around for decades and always wildly popular with fans and around the world. So let's talk about Dolly Parton. What does she bring to the table? Well, she was born into a one-room cabin in Sevier County, Tennessee. Her family was so poor that they couldn't even pay the doctor when she was born. They actually had to pay him with cornmeal instead of cash. So that's about as legit as it gets. Her father was a sharecropper, and she married her husband, Carl Dean, when she was 20 years old. And she worked with Porter Wagner, whereas Loretta was with Conway Twitty. So both a couple of fancy Dans there. She never had any children, but she does own Dollywood, which is where millions and millions and millions of children have gone over time. And she has also started the Imagination Library, which even my daughter gets a book every single month from it. If I'm not mistaken, it's 1.3 million, I believe it is, a month, books she sends out. So it is, she's definitely spreading the good word and has a lot of good community activity that really has made her popular throughout not just East Tennessee, but really worldwide. So that's the skinny on Dolly Parton. Love them both, as I said. But there can only be one winner, as you guys know. I mean, we didn't come here to just have a draw or any of that stuff. So, without further ado, let's go to the scorecards. And let's hear from the ring announcer, which is me, since it's a one-man show. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, your winner by split decision and new Queen of Hillbilly Women, the one, the only, the pride of Butcher Holler, Kentucky. I got to go with Loretta Lynn. I know that's a tough choice, but when it comes down to a couple of things, well, Loretta Lynn, for one thing, she stayed true to her roots. She has absolutely, you could hear a song she did last week and one she did 40 years ago, and they'll sound about the same. She stayed true to who she was, and she was always been herself. The thing about Dolly, she went pop on us. You know, you think about 9 to 5, even her and Kenny Rogers singing that Bee Gees song, Islands in the Stream, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's still, you know how it does. It hurts a little bit with Hillbilly Land, so I've got to go with Loretta on that one. But even more beyond that, we got to think about Dolly, because some of her popular songs, she had Jolene, she had Coat of Many Colors, 9 to 5, so she had a lot of good stuff herself, and of course the one that Whitney Houston made a monster smash, I Will Always Love You. But those two songs are really what does it for me too. When you think about hillbilly women, I think that I'm more inclined to believe that they're going to tell you that you ain't woman enough to take my man, whereas Jolene was a little bit more docile, begging her to please not take her man. The women I know around here, they will dot both your eyes for you, and you'll leave with a pop knot if you try to take a woman around here's man. So I feel like that's just based on those couple of things, by a razor thin margin, we've got to go with Loretta Lynn. Sorry if it offends anybody. Send us a message. Let me know if you agree, disagree, got some thoughts on that. You can hit us up on Facebook on our page. It's cleverly enough called Hillbilly Talk with Shane Simmons, or you can send me an email at hillbillytalk17@gmail.com. That's hillbillytalk, the number 17 at gmail.com. And I always love getting emails from folks out there. So I'm glad we finally settled that question once and for all, so we can move on to other things. We'll have another showdown down the road, but that's one I'm just glad to have behind me, because it's only uphill from here. Now moving to our next segment. In this next segment, we'll talk a little bit about the mountain superstitions that have been around for decades and decades and decades. And some of these you might be familiar with, some of them might be new to you. I've got about 15 of them here, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go ahead and talk about these a little bit, because one superstition that's kind of a newer superstition is, if you're having your first podcast and you don't talk about superstitions, you'll have bad luck. If you do talk about superstitions on your first podcast, you'll have good fortune. So I do not want to cross this one. And so we'll start off talking about these superstitions. One of them goes back a long, long ways, is if a bird flies into your house, then death will soon come to someone in the household. Now that's terrifying, and I know one thing: if a bird flew into my house, death would come to that bird pretty soon. That's for sure. But yeah, that's one of the stranger ones. I'm not sure what that's based on, but that's definitely one that's don't want a bird in my house. I don't know. But there's another one that comes up is, if you dream about a birth, then there will be a death. But if you dream about death, then there will be a birth. So it looks like you got the old opposite or reverse psychology going on with that dream. Yeah, let's see. A third one is, and this is one that I observe religiously for some reason. I don't know if it's superstition or what, but if you walk on someone's grave, then you will be haunted by their ghost. So I've just never done that. I don't know if it's just a show of respect or what, but I'm very, 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 very particular about not ever stepping over someone's grave. I always get right to the edge where the next person's headstone is or something, because it just does not feel right. So I'm not haunted, so maybe that one does work. I don't know. This is another one. I hate wind chimes, so this one is good for me. The sound of wind chimes calls up the dead. So, yeah. Good thing I'm not a fan of those. So hopefully some of you will be pulling yours down too. Nothing I hate any worse than, I mean, if it's bad enough it was my own wind chimes, but I can't stand when I got a neighbor that's got those things going off all the time, especially in the middle of the night. Okay, here's one that's very popular. I think most people know this one. Death comes in threes. If one person dies, then two more are sure to follow. And boy, this one really comes true. A lot of times you'll see that with celebrity deaths. I don't know how many times I've seen this one, and it's just almost bizarre. So I don't know what it's based on, why that would be, but that is the old superstition. Death comes in threes. here's one for us, too. If a person's picture falls off the wall, then that person will die soon. That's not very good. So make sure when you're hanging your pictures up, you got a good stud to put it on, and use a couple of nails if you have to. Just keep that sucker up there. This is one I've never heard, and I've never heard of. An owl hooting in the daytime means there's going to be a death soon. Well, okay. An owl hooting in the daytime means there's going to be a death soon. Okay. Well, moving right along. And ironically, I use the word moving because cow moos after midnight means someone in the family will soon die. Well, fortunately, I don't live near any cows, so that one doesn't apply to me. This is another one I observe. I don't like it. I don't know why it bothers me to no end. Maybe it is because I'd heard the superstition or something, but it is bad luck to rock an empty rocking chair. I can't stand it. I can't stand to see somebody move one. I don't know what it is. So maybe it was when I was a little kid I heard this superstition, or maybe it's just something that just tells you it is not a right thing to do. This is another one that I know a lot of people observe this one. You must stop a swing yourself after getting off of it. If the swing stops on its own, then death will come. I've seen a lot of people get off there and stop their swing. Some of it, I guess, is for the safety of the other person, but this is one that's very, very common, too. It is bad luck to walk under a ladder. I don't know many people that can lead to bad luck itself. Somebody fall off or the ladder fall on top of you, so that was not too awfully terribly odd. This is one I've heard of a lot, too. You must carry a body to be buried feet first, or their spirit will return. So that's an interesting one. If you feel a cold chill, then someone just stepped on the spot where you will be buried. That's not good. Let's see. If you hear a knock at the door and no one is there, then it was a death knock warning you that someone is about to die. And this is the last one here. If you don't enjoy this podcast, you will be cursed with bad luck, and I will be cursed with hurt feelings. So let's just not do this one. Let's please observe that one. Anyway, that's some of the superstitions. If you know some of the other ones out there, there's bukus of these things. Feel free to send us a message, like I said, on Facebook, or email at hillbillytalk17@gmail.com. And we will share these superstitions with the rest of the world, because I know a lot of people are very curious and interested in these things. So if you know one of them, shoot me a message and I'll be sure to share it on the air. Let's go to the third. I like this one. This is a very popular one for me. So I asked a question on the Hillbilly Talk Facebook page, which, have I plugged that enough yet? I think I've mentioned it about 25 times already, but I can probably get to 50 before this thing's over with. Anyway, ask a question on the Hillbilly Talk Facebook page about what are some common, popular hillbilly phrases. And it ended up being the most popular post I've ever had on Facebook. I got over 1,400 responses. Of course, there were some duplicates and some just didn't make any sense whatsoever, but there was a bunch of great stuff. So I've got probably a couple hundred of these. I'm going to go through about 5 of them today, but this will probably be a little regular segment on here because I just love it. And I think most people do love hearing these things, even if you've never heard them before, or if you're very familiar with them. It's still kind of fun to just hear them again from time to time. So I'll start off with some of these that were written in on that Facebook page. The first one, and I like this one a lot, is to describe somebody as being all hat and no cattle. And that's always a good one. It's somebody being full of big talk, but not really backing it up with anything. For example, and I'll just use my partner in Appalachian Project for example. I said, Jason Parton is all hat, no cattle. I just wanted to do that because in case he ever listens to this, it'll be a good insult on the first show. Anyway, that one was sent in by Robert A.G., so thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. The next one is a little phrase describing something as being hotter than a $2 pistol. Well, that used to be a description for stolen. You don't hear it as much anymore. When something was called hot, it meant it had been stolen from somebody. TV, gun, whatever. So that's the origin of that phrase. But Mr. George Jones made that thing popular too, describing a pretty woman. If you remember from the old song, Lord, she was hotter than a $2 pistol. Anyway, that was made that phrase even more popular than it already was. So that's a good one. And I thank you to Kenneth Hill for sending that one. Here's another one I love. And then it goes like this. Beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes all the way to the bone. That one's a little play, too, where obviously beauty is only skin deep. Was as an old saying, of course you should judge somebody by their personality, not just their looks and all that jazz. But somebody with a clever, smart alecky mind came up with adding that little to the end that ugly goes all the way to the bone. Beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes all the way to the bone. Thank you, Pat Woods, for that one. Moving right along, which kind of the theme of this one actually is describing somebody as having a hitch in their get-along. Actually, I've got a hitch in my get-along right now, and that is a limp, hobbled up or slowed down by something, and I've injured somehow, some way. I managed to injure both my ankles, and I've got a cracked rib, so I've got a hitch in my get-along, for sure. That one dates back to the old Western days, so that's a popular one from way back when. That one's from Kelly Major, and thank you for that one, Kelly. Last but not least, let's do this one. Describing something as being high as a Georgia pine. You can describe something or somebody. Now, of course, a Georgia pine is a Georgia pine tree. Those things are pretty dadgum tall, if you didn't know that already. So that's where that is based on. And what it really means is, and I've heard it's mostly used for somebody being high on drugs. If you're high as a Georgia pine, that means you're very, very out of your mind high. I've also heard people use it to say price being high, like a high price. So that price of those, my grocer's as high as a Georgia pine, something like that. But mainly what I've heard it lately has been to describe somebody that's been a little hopped up on drugs, or I think way back when probably, I think you could describe somebody high even if they were drunk, but that's primarily how it's used these days. Alrighty. Well, it looks like we do have time for our next segment, so hot dog. If you spend any time in Hillbilly Land here, you know that there's some strange town names and there's some strange backstories to them. And so I thought that would make for a perfect reason to go with this very story. Let's talk about the strange story of Strange Creek, West Virginia. So Strange Creek is a community named after Strange Creek, which is a creek that runs through Braxton County, and it's up to the border of Clay County in West Virginia. And then Strange Creek was formerly known as Turkey Creek. But that's where the story takes a strange turn, because according to local legend back in 1795, there was a party traveling through the area surveying the land, and among that party was a young cook named William Strange. He went out and got lost in the woods from the rest of the team, and while he was out there lost, there was some gunfire. And apparently, fearing that it was coming from some hostile Indians, William Strange ran further and further away from his party and got deeper and deeper in the woods and got lost, which is no surprise if you've been in that part of the country, back before there was a population, that it was a very rural area. So he had no food, and only his dog was his companion. So Strange wandered the area for days and days and days, and he started getting weaker and weaker because his hunger started setting in on him. So finally he sat down and leaned back against a sycamore tree, and at this point he was very emaciated and just worn out. He'd just about given up on life. So he would actually never get up from that. He died there of starvation. So flash forward to about 1835, some local settlers discovered the undisturbed skeleton of William Strange and his dog, still located at the sycamore tree with a rifle and shot lying nearby. And they also found a poem that Strange had carved into the tree. And it goes something like this. Strange is my name, and strange the ground, and strange it is that I cannot be found. So that is the strange story of how Turkey Creek became Strange Creek. Now, I don't know how true or not true that story is, but like many of these stories in Appalachia, they've been handed down in Hillbilly Land, as they've been handed down orally for over years and years and years, which you don't know what's true and what's not. There's no documentation of it one way or the other. which allows you the opportunity to just believe them without questioning, which is exactly what I've chose to do. So I believe that story without any doubts in my mind. Anyway, that's the story of Strange Creek. I used to do a segment like that on National Public Radio for West Virginia Public Radio, I guess it was, and wildly popular. Everybody loved it. I got comments. They got comments. They told me how much they loved it, but ended up dropping me. And I think it's because you have to edit me sometimes. I don't have the best filter. I've been pretty good today because I'm afraid my mom might be listening, so I won't use any cuss words or anything like that on here. But anyway, I'm glad to be able to unleash these town names again because I absolutely love doing it. And like I said, it's always been popular every time we've tried it out before. So I appreciate you guys listening today. And this is the end of our first podcast. If you want to support us, if you're as excited and enthused and just love this half as much as I did today, and I know you did, you had to. This is a pretty daggone good show. You got to admit it. If you want to support us, check us out on Patreon. We got www.patreon.com/Appalachia, APPALACHIA. I actually spelled it right. I can pronounce it. Daggone it, I'm legit. But if you'd like to support us, check us out there. We got join our community, and we got all kinds of little perks on that one. And you can also, of course, follow us on Facebook, Hillbilly Talk with Shane Simmons. And you can send me an email anytime. Love hearing from my friends out there at hillbillytalk17@gmail.com. That's hillbillytalk, the number 1, the number 7 at gmail.com. I hope that you enjoyed this show. I certainly did, and we'll see you next week, and we'll have more to talk about and talk a little bit more about this strange, mysterious world of the hillbillies. So until then, be good. And if you can't be good, be careful. At least that's what my dad always told me. Good advice, actually. Good advice.
Thanks for listening to Hillbilly Talk with Shane Simmons. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes. If you didn't enjoy our show, bless your heart. We'll be praying for you. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll talk to you again next week.